Welcome to the WPIAL Blitz Show. This is Badge. There's my buddy Ian, Mr. Graphics. Oh, man, I'll tell you, Ian, we had a lot of great comments on the show last week. Probably had, as we're talking a little bit beforehand, we probably had our, biggest audience of the year last week. And, gosh, we've got more great playoff stuff, not only with the WPIAL, but you're going to incorporate some statewide stuff in there, and we're going to carry this thing on, all the way to Hershey. So how you doing this week, my man?
Doing great. We had a full first round of WPIAL playoff action, which was excellent. We talked last week about how about 95% of the scheduled games had been able to happen this year. We had no cancellations this past week due to COVID or any other reasons. So it's really exciting that we were able to get a full first round of the playoffs in, and we're moving on. This week is, as you mentioned, with the state playoffs, technically the first round, I guess, of the state playoffs, like the round of 16, if you will. So it's, even though the WPIAL hasn't had a championship game yet, most of the WPIAL teams will enter the state playoffs at either the quarterfinals or semifinal level. So this is really the beginning of the state tournament too.
Yeah, absolutely. District 3 started with some of their games, last week in 3A and 6A. And yeah, those are technically, first round state playoff games. So a good time to start incorporating everything in, get some of our statewide audience going, I mean, why not?
Absolutely. And there's potential in a couple of the brackets. The District 7, District 3 teams are going to meet in the semifinals. Some other places they might have to wait till the finals to meet, although there's some really good teams out there in some of the classifications as well. So it'll be exciting to watch as it progresses along.
Yeah, absolutely. And all right, take her away, my man. Let's get started.
All right. We had some great games this past weekend, some blowouts like you do in the first round, but also some really great games. So as we move along here to the semifinals in 1A through 5A, and then the championship game in 6A, it's going to be a fun ride because now really the cream's risen to the top. That the WPIAL did a really good job of seeding, as you'll see in most of the classifications. That if it wasn't the top 4 seeds, it was 1, 2, 3, 5 that advanced. Really the top 3 seeds did very well in pretty much all the classifications.
Yeah, and I'll talk a little bit about probably the only big upset there. So we'll get into that a little later.
Yeah. So follow us on social media. Check out steelcityblitz.com, where I do all my writing. I think last week in addition to our show, I published over like 13,000 words of content between my playoff primer that had like the histories of all the teams and then just the playoff preview post. So won't be that much this week, but we'll have a full preview post with all the games detailed. So be sure to check that out. If you're watching on YouTube or the Small Player Big Play app, check out steelcityblitz.com as well for all of our WPIAL coverage.
Yeah.
So moving right in to 6A, there were only 4 teams that made the playoffs, and the semifinal results, North Allegheny and Seneca Valley played for the first time this year. Their first game this year got canceled because of a COVID case. Seneca Valley had actually knocked North Allegheny out of the playoffs the last 2 times they had met in the postseason in 2016 and 2018, but North Allegheny got the better of them this year. Nate Hoke, who is the son of Chris Hoke, who is a nose tackle for the Steelers. He's committed to BYU as a linebacker, also plays fullback for North Allegheny, scored 2 rushing touchdowns. Seneca Valley's only score was on a fumble recovery, so Seneca Valley didn't produce any points offensively. North Allegheny's defense really held them in check, which was what we'd come to expect out of North Allegheny this year. Their defense has been the best in 6A. The other game in 6A, we expected to be a lot closer. Earlier this year when Mount Lebanon played Central Catholic, Mount Lebanon came back from a 30-17 deficit and won 37-30. That propelled Mount Lebanon to getting that number 2 seed, but Central Catholic got much the better of them in the rematch. Mount Lebanon had negative offensive yards. A lot of that came from a minus 40-yard play on a punt. Their punter bobbled the ball and then fumbled it, and they recovered it, but it was a turnover on down, so it was like a negative 40 offensive yards. But they never recovered from that. But Central's defense just completely shut down Mount Lebanon. They had no answer for it. And Central's star running back Eddie Tillman had 151 yards and a touchdown, and Mount Lebanon just couldn't do anything right. Their coach Bob Palko, who's won more WPIAL titles than any other coach, had a great quote after the game that Mount Lebanon was really happy to be here because they want to get to where North Allegheny and Central Catholic are. So he felt like this was a good game for them to find out where they are and just to teach the kids how much farther they have to go to get where they want to be, because they want to be WPIAL champions, but they've got a ways to go to keep building the program. So he was really enthusiastic about how the year went, but also he felt like this was a good springboard into next year as a good learning lesson for the underclassmen for this is how much harder we have to work and how much better we have to get moving forward. So in the 6A championship game, it will be North Allegheny against Central Catholic. They've met 5 times previously in the WPIAL playoffs. Central Catholic is the defending WPIAL 6A champions. They've got 7 championships under their belt. North Allegheny's won 4, 3 of them in a row from 2010 to 2012. And North Allegheny's won 3 state titles. Central Catholic's won 4. So these are obviously the 2 premier programs in 6A.
And this is who everybody would have expected would have been in the final game. But let's just say this was a preseason pick for the 6A championship, right?
Yes. Yeah. This was my pick. I actually had picked Central over North Allegheny as my preseason picks. So I'll stick with that one, even though North Allegheny beat them 35-21 earlier this year. I think teams can beat Central Catholic once. Beating them twice can be very difficult. Central's got a new quarterback. They actually stuck him in at the tail end of the North Allegheny game because their offense wasn't really moving the ball all that well. Adam Oberon's his name, and he's been really good ever since he entered and actually given them a passing game that they really didn't have in that first meeting with North Allegheny when they were just pretty much trying to run the ball, and North Allegheny ran out to a big lead, and Central's 21 points all came in the fourth quarter when the game was pretty much put away. But it's going to be a good matchup. I mean, Central's got the highest scoring team in 6A. North Allegheny's the second highest scoring team. North Allegheny's got the top rated defense. Central's got the third rated defense. So it's the teams everyone expected to be here, and it's clearly the historically best 2 teams in the classification now that PINE-RICHLAND's moved down to 5A. So should be a great game taking place.
So are you going to offer any picks for these games, or are you just going to kind of let them run? Well, you said Central, you were going with Central Catholic over North Allegheny. So
yeah, I think North Allegheny's got some really good players too, and Khalil Dinkins, who's committed to Penn State. He's a wide receiver, defensive back. They use him as a running back, just get the ball in his hands however they can. He's a fantastic player, but just trying to beat Central Catholic twice in one year now that they actually have a bit of a passing game with Adam Oberon and 2 really good running backs in Eddie Tillman and Gannon Carruthers, that they're going to be a tough team to stop. And I like Central Catholic's chances here. That said, North Allegheny beat them once this year, so I won't be shocked if North Allegheny wins again, but it's going to take a really great defensive effort from NA's side to come out on top.
All right.
So moving on to the state bracket, this is the only WPIAL classification where the winner will enter at the state quarterfinal level. So the winner of this game will take on, I believe, most likely McDowell from District 10. I think Erie High had some COVID cases and was basically bowing out. I could be wrong about that, though. McDowell has some history with these teams, though, because McDowell played in the WPIAL for a while back in the mid-2000s, late 90s to mid-2000s. So there is some older history here. Actually, there's always a debate on Twitter whenever, James Conner does something good, that the WPIAL folks all claim, oh, James Conner's a WPIAL player, and the District 10 people are like, well, he played at Erie McDowell, and WPIAL folks are all like, but McDowell was a WPIAL team when he played there, so it goes back and forth.
One comment for me, at least on District 3 there, William Penn got in due to a walkover forfeit because Harrisburg had a COVID case. Central York and William Penn, it's the first time that I can recall that the District 3 champion for 6A will that there's someone from the York Adams area who's qualified, and is guaranteed. This is guaranteed to be a York Adams champion, because William Penn is basically the arch rival there of Central York. So yeah, that's going to be very interesting there. They would have played the last game of the season anyway against one another for the York Adams title. So that's going to be very interesting. And, when you look at the District 12 guys there, man, that's, LaSalle College, they've played a pretty good schedule. They've kind of played all comers, and they've done a good job there. Obviously, Archbishop Wood, they were the 5A champion last year. So
yeah, and I think that's the big noteworthy thing here, and as we go through some of these state brackets, is that some of these teams have moved up in classification. Cathedral Prep had moved up from 4A to 5A. Archbishop Wood moved up from 5A to 6A. So there's been some movement here of these teams statewide that are going to make some of the top classifications a lot tougher to navigate.
Well, and I think, one of the teams that's missing this year that's normally here is State College. But look at Altoona. Great story, Altoona, coming back. I think this is his second-year coach there too. So I think that's a great story.
Another former WPIAL program.
Right. Former WPIAL program, but actually they play in the Mid-Penn Conference that I'm pretty familiar with. And look at Coatesville, Spring Ford. Don't discount, those District 1 teams there too. So it's going to be a lot of fun as we move down to Hershey.
It is. Yep. And I'll say, I don't know a ton about the other teams. I'll say Altoona never fared very well when they played in the WPIAL. They got into the playoffs a couple years, won a couple playoff games here and there, but I don't think they ever made it past the quarterfinals. And this was back when 16 teams made the playoffs. Sure. So quarterfinals, you had to win a first-round game, but still, I don't think they ever made it past the quarterfinals on the WPIAL side. But it just worked out a lot better for them from a transportation and scheduling standpoint to go back to District 6, just because of they were having to travel down to like Cannonsburg or Washington County at the kind of far western part of the state, and it was 2.5 hour drive for a football game. For a regular season football game was kind of ridiculous.
Yeah, well, that's not uncommon for the Mid-Penn when you consider that State College and Chambersburg, I mean, they're in the same division. So
okay, moving down to 5A. A lot of blowouts here. I think we've talked about this a bit this year, that the top 4 teams in 5A were really kind of head and shoulders above everyone else. The other teams that got in the playoffs definitely deserved to be there, but the top teams were definitely head and shoulders better. PINE-RICHLAND's just been better than everyone else all season. We've talked about Cole Spencer, who's their dual threat quarterback. He's going to Penn on a wrestling scholarship, but he's been a fantastic football player. I mean, he broke their career passing touchdown record at the school.
That says a lot right there.
And considering that's a school that produced Ben DiNucci, who started it on on Sunday Night Football for the Cowboys this week, and Phil Jakovic, who's at Boston College now. I mean, those were 2 great high school quarterbacks. Both of them took their teams to the state championship game. Jerkovic won his in 2017. DiNucci lost his in 2014. But nevertheless, I mean, those were 2 really, really good quarterbacks. And for Cole Spencer to surpass their career touchdown passing record is, certainly an accomplishment for that young man. Eli Yoakum, their top wide receiver, 3 receiving touchdowns, had a pick 6. I mean, he's been all over the place. And then Miguel Jackson, their defensive end, who's committed to Liberty, also broke the school's career sack record. So it was a record-setting game for PINE-RICHLAND on many fronts as they stormed past South Fayette. Penn Trafford, for the 2nd straight year, knocked out Upper St. Clair from the playoffs. Ethan Carr, Penn Trafford's dual threat quarterback, threw for a touchdown, ran for 2, and their other running back, Cade Giacomelli, ran for 124 yards and 2 touchdowns. Upper St. Clair really just had no answer for Penn Trafford's running game. The closest game, kind of surprisingly, was Penn Hills against Gateway. These 2 were old rivals back in Quad A, played in the same conference together. Relatively close school districts out kind of in the east end of the Pittsburgh area for those not familiar with the area. But Gateway has the best player in the state in Derek Davis, and he showed why he was the best player in the state. He had an early rushing touchdown. He had an interception in the end zone, which was one of 3 turnovers that Gateway produced inside the 10-yard line to preserve the shutout and,
Crazy.
carry themselves to victory. Gateway missed a couple games earlier in the year due to COVID cases. They missed 2 because they had a case at Gateway, and then 1 because there was a case at Penn Trafford, and they were supposed to play Penn Trafford. So they've been a little, I'll say, rocky since they came back. They had a close call against Woodland Hills. I think it was 14-6. Then this 14-0 game against Penn Hills. So they've still been strong defensively, but their offense hasn't quite been clicking as a lot of people thought that it would, or what it was doing early in the season when they were putting up a lot of points. So they've got a game against Peters Township, which we'll talk about in a minute, which should be a fantastic game. Peters Township stormed past Woodland Hills, mostly thanks to their defense, scored 2 defensive touchdowns and had 2 safeties. So, I mean,
Wow.
Wow.
That's disheartening, for a team when unfortunately you have the defense score as much as almost the offense. I mean,
Yep. Yeah, that was and Peters Township has a good offense too, but their defense has just been absolutely outstanding this season. So let's talk about these semifinals here. We've got PINE-RICHLAND against Penn Trafford. Penn Trafford's only loss this year was a 3-point loss to Peters Township. And actually in that game, Peters Township's defense had, I think it was 7 turnovers and scored 2 or 3 touchdowns. So Peters defense has been scoring all year, but Penn Trafford's been beating everyone else pretty handily. So we've got the 2 highest scoring teams in 5A, 2 very strong defenses, and Penn Trafford won the only playoff meeting between the 2 teams back in 2015 when we were still under 4 classifications, and they both played in Quad A. But teams that have been here before, 2nd straight semifinal for Penn Trafford, 7th straight for PINE-RICHLAND. PINE-RICHLAND's reached 3 straight championship games in 6A. They won the WPIAL title in 2017 and 2018. That 2017 team obviously won the state title, and they lost in the 2019 6A title game to Central Catholic last year. Penn Trafford, they've made a couple WPIAL championship games over the last few seasons. I think 2015 and 2017 was when they reached the WPIAL finals over the last few seasons, but they've never won a WPIAL championship game. So Penn Trafford looking to get back there. PINE-RICHLAND has been there the last 3 years, and I like PINE-RICHLAND here. It's just, I mean, they're just the best team. I mean, Penn Trafford's a really good team, but PINE-RICHLAND's just head and shoulders better. It just is what it is.
Hard to disagree with that.
The other semifinal is actually a rematch of last year's WPIAL championship game in 5A, where Gateway beat Peters Township by 1 point, 21-20. It was actually came with some controversy too, that late in the game, Gateway was punting they were near midfield. They were punting it back to Peters Township, and Gateway's punter fumbled the snap and then went down on one knee to pick up the ball. And since his knee touched the ground, he should have been down right there, and it should have been Peters Township's ball with like 2 minutes left at midfield, with them down by a point. But instead, they let the play go on, and the kid punted it, and they downed it inside the 5, and Peters Township had to drive it like 90-some yards to try and win, and they just weren't able to do it, and Gateway won the title. And then so Gateway wound up losing to Archbishop Wood in the state semis last year because the WPIAL teams.
Yeah, and didn't they play down in Chambersburg or something like that? I mean,
I think they did.
Man, that was quite a hike for everybody.
Yep. And last year was actually Peters Township's first WPIAL championship game appearance in school history. So they're looking to get back there for a second time. They've never won a title. They've got a great defense and led by Donovan McMillan, who's a safety that's committed to Florida, along with a number of other really good players. Corbin Hondrew's committed to Miami of Ohio. He's a linebacker. But Gateway's got Derek Davis, who is the best player in the state. So you can't discount that. Gateway's got some other really good players, a good wide receiving core as well. So
it really helps when teams can kind of put their team on somebody's shoulders like that, especially at playoff time, correct?
Absolutely. Yep. And Gateway's got a good quarterback in Carson Engelko and 2 wide receivers in Patrick Bodie and Chamor Price, who probably both should go to D1 schools. They're just that good. And then obviously Derek Davis in the backfield. So Gateway is loaded. Gateway's got a ton of talented players, but so does Peters Township. And Peters has that revenge factor too, that they got beat by Gateway last year. And that's going to be a little extra motivation for them. Gateway's been a hard team to read because of those missed games. I mean, they've only played 5 games so far this year, whereas Peters has played 7. So I think my preseason pick here in 6A was PINE-RICHLAND over Gateway in the title game. So I'll probably stick with that one, but I won't be surprised at all if Peters Township wins this game. I could easily see them winning just for how good their defense is playing right now and how Gateway struggled to put points on the board the last few weeks. I mean, Gateway really should have I expected them to put, at least 35 up against Penn Hill's team, and they only put up 14 against them. So
yeah, this game just looks very evenly matched.
It is. Yep. They're very tightly matched teams. So as we look at the state playoff bracket in 5A, obviously Archbishop Wood has moved up to 6A, which we talked about earlier. And the winners here will move on to what will be the WPIAL final, but also the state quarterfinal. And we get a District 3 versus District 7 semifinal as well to look forward to in 5A.
Yeah, I'll be actually broadcasting the Governor Mifflin Mechanicsburg game, and I got to see Warwick play a little earlier this year. They're pretty talented. And on the right side of the bracket there, Cathedral Prep, that's going to be very interesting. I mean, traditionally I've seen them butt heads with all the 4A guys. So seeing them up in the 5A to me is probably the most intriguing story in the entire postseason in the PIAA me is seeing them, butt heads with the 5A guys here. And I'm interested to see how that all shakes out, because quite honestly, on that side of the bracket, I think that they're coming out of that side. So, out of that bracket there with, PINE-RICHLAND and everybody, that's why we do this show, man, because you and I are going to butt heads here eventually.
We are. And I agree with you that Cathedral Prep is probably the best looking team on the right side of the bracket, but on the left side, I mean, honestly, any of the 4 teams that come out of the WPIAL are capable of competing for a state title. I mean, I'm not going to say that, they're definitely going to win it, but I think these 4 teams from the WPIAL could play with anyone statewide and compete with them and have a close game.
Yeah, Governor Mifflin probably has one of the most sought after players, if not in Pennsylvania, maybe in the U.S., in running back Nick Singleton. I think everybody and anybody has offered him, and that, including, I mean, like I said, there probably isn't anybody who hasn't offered Nick, and he's a transcendent player. And sometimes those are the players that can, like we talked about, that you kind of have to, ride the guys that brought you there, when it comes to the playoffs. So how those guys perform in the postseason, that's typically how the team's going to perform.
Yep. And Derek Davis is the same kind of player. He at Gateway that, he's got offers from Clemson and Alabama and Ohio State and LSU and USC that, I mean, it's a really nationwide recruiting effort to try and get him. And actually, if we want to have some relatively breaking news here as of a couple hours ago, so relatively breaking news. Yeah. Derek Davis basically released his final 3 schools, which are Ohio State, Penn State, and LSU. So he eliminated Pitt and Georgia, who had been in his top 5.
Okay.
So, yeah. And Ohio State's done a really good job in the last few years of recruiting top end WPIAL talent, and even top end talent from Pennsylvania.
Right. Well, they got Julian Fleming last year, right?
Yep. So they've really hit Pennsylvania hard and taken some good players, which,
aren't they?
Aren't
they taking the quarterback and then Marvin Harrison Jr. from St. Joe Prep?
Yeah, I think that sounds correct. Yes.
So
yeah, it's interesting though, considering Derek Davis had offers from Alabama, Clemson, and those schools too. That, I mean, obviously LSU, but Ohio State and Penn State are relatively closer to home too. Although I have to wonder if Pitt's performance this season hasn't soured some top end prospects on their program as well, because Pitt was kind of touted preseason as they could compete for an ACC title. Their defense was supposed to be so good, and I know they had a couple kids opt out of the season, but nevertheless, when Pat Narduzzi comes out at the beginning of the year and says, "Oh, we're being disrespected, we're not ranked in the polls," and then they go out and lose, a bunch of games.
And then they make them look good. And they make the people that did the predictions look good,
Right, exactly. So, just sort of random speculation on my part there. No actual sources, but so it'll be interesting to see where Derek Davis decides to play college football. But for now, he's been great since his freshman year. So we get to enjoy him for a few more games here at the high school level. And actually, Donovan McMillan going to Florida from Peters Township he's been described as the best player ever to play at Peters Township. So, and he's a safety. Derek Davis is being recruited as a safety, but is an excellent running back. He can pretty much play wherever he wants to at the next level. So seeing those two go head to head is going to make for a fun semifinal here too. Moving down to 4A. Another classification where we had 3 blowouts and then one really tight and exciting game. So we'll talk about the blowouts first. Aliquippa did what they do, scored 2 touchdowns on defense, shut out Hampton. So good for Hampton for making the playoffs for the first time since 2015. But they just ran into that unstoppable force that is Aliquippa in the playoffs. And Aliquippa is a great story. We've talked about them all year, being a 1A size school that got forced up into 4A because of the PIAA's new success formula. They appealed it because they were already playing up in 3A. So I can understand their case that we're already playing up in classification. The success formula is supposed to push teams up that are just playing in their regular classification that are head and shoulders better, like it did with your Archbishop Woods moving up, your Cathedral Preps moving up. Those ones made sense. But for Aliquippa that was already playing 2 classifications higher than their enrollment size, I can see why they tried to make the case to stay where they were. But the PIAA ruled against them, so they had to play up in 4A this year. But they were undefeated, got the number 1 seed, and rolled past Hampton in the opening round, which sets up a really good game against Bell Vernon, which we'll talk about in a minute, because Bell Vernon's got a fantastic dual threat quarterback in Devin Whitlock, who ran for 3 touchdowns last week, and Quentin Martin added 3 more. But Whitlock's just an all-around great player between passing, running, and as a defensive back. Actually, he's a really good point guard in basketball too. So, probably one of the best 2-sport athletes around in the WPIAL, at least left in the playoffs, because there's a couple other really good ones like Rodney Gallagher out of Laurel Highlands, but his team didn't make the playoffs. Thomas Jefferson did what Thomas Jefferson does, bounced back from that loss against McKeesport. Mars came in with the WPIAL's leading rusher and Teddy Ruffner, and TJ just jumped all over him. It was like 27-0 before you even knew what happened. They just, and when it's 27-0 in the second quarter, that pretty much takes your running game out of it, and Mars really didn't have an answer for that. I think Mars's only touchdown came on a kickoff return too, so their offense really didn't mount much of anything against TJ's defense. And then the best game of the night, really in the top 3 classifications, Plum continues their historic season. And I forgot to mention this last week, but Plum and McKeesport had played in a conference together the last few years, and McKeesport had just beaten the snot out of them. Like, I think it was like 62 to something last year when they played. Let me see if I can find it here real quick. But yeah, McKeesport had just beaten the crap out of Plum last year when they played. And then Plum turns around and with a fantastic defensive effort shuts it down. Yeah, it was 62-40 last year McKeesport beat Plum. And then the year before that, it was, hold on, there it is. It was 54-0 McKeesport beat Plum. So yeah, two just
Payback.
absolutely, yeah, payback for the last 2 seasons. McKeesport's kicked a field goal early, and then Plum scored a touchdown and missed the extra point. And then McKeesport scored a touchdown, missed the extra point. So it was 9-6 McKeesport at halftime, and then Plum scored a touchdown early in the third quarter and just held up on defense the rest of the game to preserve that victory. So a great job for Plum. Head coach Matt Morgan, who we had on the show earlier this year, congratulations to him. Plum's first playoff win since 2014, which is absolutely great to see. We'll talk about them in a minute now, but this is going to be a great game between Aliquippa and Bell Vernon on the top half of the bracket, just because, Bell Vernon lost in the WPIAL final to Thomas Jefferson last year. Their only loss this season was to Thomas Jefferson. They actually played him close. It was 21-21 at halftime, and then TJ pulled away and beat him 42-21. But 2 really good offensive teams, 2 really good defensive teams. We talked about Devin Whitlock for Bell Vernon, and Aliquippa is going to have a tough task to slow him down. But what Aliquippa does have is a really big line. They've got some big boys. So, I'm talking like some kids like 275, 300 pounders on the line, and playing 2 ways, offense and defense. They're just almost impossible to run against, and they just are road graders in the ground game, paving the way for both of Aliquippa's running backs.
Well, it looks like they've butted heads in this semifinal before. That's going to be, always, trying to get over the hump, man. Yep.
And Aliquippa's got that streak of 12 straight championship game appearances dating back to 2008, when they played in AA under 4 classifications, and then they played up in 3A the last 4 years and made the championship game. And so, 12 straight years to make a WPIAL final is just an incredible streak. Yeah,
that's incredible.
And
considering the size of the school,
Aliquippa's won 17 WPIAL championships, the most of any school. Just, historic over time. You look, their first one came in 1952, and they just keep winning decade after decade after decade. And yep, it's Aliquippa is a fantastic story. There's a great book out there called Playing Through the Whistle that a guy named S.L. Price, who writes for Sports Illustrated, wrote a book on the history of the town and the program, and kind of how the football program's success is interlaced with the history of the town and the community. And it's a great book. I highly recommend reading it. But it's, just the story of Aliquippa being an old steel town. The mill shut down, industry left, there wasn't any jobs, kind of became a economically depressed area, and they're able to just persevere and continue to succeed on the football field and just pump out athlete after athlete after athlete. The list of guys that have come through Aliquippa is just insane.
It's a who's who.
Right. Oh, pretty much. Yeah. It's a who's who of, Western Pennsylvania football names, pretty much. But both these teams have also had some recent success. Bell Vernon in their 4th straight semifinal, and that's all been in 4A. Aliquippa, this is their first year in 4A. So this will be the best team Aliquippa's faced all year. So it'll be interesting to see, Bell Vernon pretty handily beat the Chartiers Valley team that Aliquippa also beat, handily this year. So it's going to be a good one. This is probably going to be one of the best games of this week. On the other side, speaking of Plum, facing off with Thomas Jefferson. And, you want to talk about streaks. Not only has Thomas Jefferson reached 5 straight championship games, but this is their 22nd semifinal game in the last 23 years. So, what Thomas Jefferson does is make it to the semifinals. They haven't always made it to the championship game, but they've been pretty much good enough for the last 2.5 decades to make the semifinals every year, which is just an incredible run for a public school program. We talked about some of the teams in higher classifications that are private school programs that are able to get players from all over. Famously, Thomas Jefferson and Erie Cathedral Prep have butted heads over the last few years, as you mentioned, in the 4A state playoffs. And at one point, Thomas Jefferson's head coach, Bill Churpak, after winning the WPIAL title, kind of famously said, "Oh, now we got to go play that all-star team from up north," referring to Cathedral Prep the following week. But for Thomas Jefferson as a public school program to be able to do what they've done is great.
Yeah, not a lot of text on the Plum thing there. Obviously,
Yep.
they had a marvelous season. You know, I mean, obviously TJ is going to be favored in this game.
Yes.
But I mean, how much do you give Plum an opportunity to look? I mean, they're the undefeated team here, not Thomas Jefferson.
They are, and I mean, depending on how much weight you want to put on the transitive property, right? Plum just beat McKeesport. McKeesport beat Thomas Jefferson. But what McKeesport does very well is run the ball. And McKeesport doesn't have much of a passing offense at all. And Plum defensively all year has been really good against the run. When we talked to Matt Morgan back, I think it was week 3 or 4,
Yeah.
Plum had just beaten Mars with Teddy Ruffner, who wound up winning the WPIAL rushing title. And they really did a good job of limiting his big plays. I think Coach Morgan talked about, don't let him get those 20 and 30 yard runs, hold him to 4. If you hold him to 4 or 5 yards, that makes a big difference in, just making them slowly, methodically have to work their way down the field and wear him down with hits and with attrition versus letting him break off big runs. And Thomas Jefferson, though, they've got a passing game that's probably the best passing game in 4A. I mean, we just saw that Jake Pugh threw for 4 touchdowns last week. Preston Zandier had 3 touchdown receptions. I think Ian Hansen had 2. So I
You
don't
like
know.
TJ.
I like TJ because I don't know if – I know Plum can stop the run. I don't know if Plum can stop the pass. And that's really what it comes down to. What McKeesport did really well against Thomas Jefferson was ball control, was they were able to run the ball and keep the ball away from TJ's offense. And TJ didn't score until the 4th quarter of that game. McKeesport was up 20-0, and TJ stormed back and scored 2 touchdowns on him pretty quick in the 4th quarter. And TJ was actually driving with inside a minute to go, down 20-14 inside the 10-yard line, and McKeesport stopped him 4 times, basically throwing into the end zone. So, TJ is beatable, which kind of surprised me. But the beginning of the year, I predicted a TJ Aliquippa final, so I'm going to stick with that.
Stick with it. Why not?
Yep. I had Thomas Jefferson beating Aliquippa in the championship game as my preseason pick, so I'm going to stick with that. But I would not be surprised if Bell Vernon beat Aliquippa either, just because I think those are 2 really evenly matched teams, and Devin Whitlock's the kind of player that can give defenses headaches, and Bell Vernon's built themselves into a really well-rounded program. So these should be two really good semifinals. And looking at the state bracket here, with Cathedral Prep moving up to 5A, I really think that whoever comes out of the WPIAL here is probably the favorite statewide. I think Dallas from District 2 made the championship game last year and kind of got killed by Thomas Jefferson. But I'm not familiar as much with the teams out on your half of the state, but just kind of looking around from what I've seen, especially on the western half of the bracket, I guess I don't see anyone that is gonna be able to beat whatever team comes out of the WPIAL.
Yeah, I correct. I think that your WPIAL champ is the likely candidate to beat a Hershey. It's hard for me to argue what you said, even though Oil City might have something to say about that. Jersey Shore, really, really, really tough team there. But quite honestly, in District 3, probably the 2 best 4A teams didn't make the playoffs because of power ranking. In Bishop
there was some
Devin
controversy
and
over
First
that.
Catholic,
Yeah,
they did not make the tournament this year. So, but look, LS, they were a state quarterfinal team last year. Conrad Weiser, really good, lethal kind of passing game there. Elko's had a great season. Northern York, probably the dark horse there. Familiar with all of those teams. So, yeah, it's going to be really interesting. I mean, I would favor out of District 3 LS coming out of that. And but the Conrad Weiser is going to be a tough out for them. And so, yeah, I mean, still a lot to be decided, but it's hard for me to argue the fact that whoever comes out of the WPIAL is likely going to be, heading to Hershey.
Yep. And just a quick shout out to Chris, who's at END 2008 on Twitter, for making all these graphics. I mean, he does a fantastic job with them. He made all the helmet graphics. He made these bracket graphics. So shout out to him, because he does an excellent job too.
He does all of my graphics for like my broadcast games with my buddy Kerry Moyer. So yeah, Chris is a good man.
Yes. Moving down to 3A, we've talked all year about how good Central Valley is, and East Allegheny decided that they wanted to poke the bear a little bit. They came out pregame and kind of were jawing at them a little bit, during pregame warmups.
Why not?
Why
shouldn't they? What do they have to lose?
Yeah. They were down 35-0 before you knew what happened.
Right.
It was, the two teams got into a little bit of a confrontation before the game. There wasn't any like pushing or shoving, just a lot of words exchanged. But sometimes you poke the bear and then the bear gets you, and that's East Allegheny, I don't think knew what they were in for. Central Valley's mercy ruled every opponent they've faced so far, and just look really, really darn good. Keystone Oaks won a fantastic game against South Park. I mean, this was a back and forth contest. South Park got off to a 10-0 lead at halftime. They led 24-14 at the end of the third quarter. Keystone Oaks playing without Logan Shrub, who's their dual threat quarterback, who we've talked about, ran for 1,000, passed for 1,000 last season. He was out with an ankle injury, but Kevin Drew and Mark Hutchin came in and kind of split the load. Hutchin usually plays wide receiver. He took over at quarterback, and both of them just they found a rhythm in the second half offensively. They each ran for 2 touchdowns. Hutchin ran in the game winner in the final minutes of the game, and Keystone Oaks stormed back from a 10-point deficit entering the fourth quarter to beat South Park and make it to the semifinals for the first time since 2016, which is actually the last time they made the playoffs. North Catholic, I know there were some questions there about their quarterback, Joey Prentice, because he had also gotten hurt in week 7. He was able to play, and he came out throwing the ball and proving that he could throw because he had a hand injury. Threw 2 touchdown passes to Nick Mayer early in the game, and then North Catholic's running game kind of took it over from there. Kyle Topinski ran for 2 touchdowns, and Mount Pleasant made a bunch of mistakes, fumbles, turnovers, things like that, and North Catholic just capitalized on them. It was a pretty slow and methodical second half that North Catholic was just running the ball, getting what they could. Had a nice outside running game on sweep plays outside the tackles that Mount Pleasant really couldn't stop until 10 or 12 yards down the field, and North Catholic just worked their way down the field, didn't really have to put the ball in the air at all. The game wasn't even really that close. I mean, it went from 7-7 to 21-7 to 28-7, and it was kind of on cruise control from there. Elizabeth Forward, who won their first playoff game since 2000, beat Freeport, who we had their head coach John Gaylord on earlier this year. A lot of grit and heart from Freeport in this game. I'll say that when we had Coach Gaylord on, he talked about how Freeport always wants to be known as being the more physical team. Even if they don't win, they never give up. They're always going to smack you in the mouth, that kind of thing. And Elizabeth Forward got out to a 27-0 lead in the first half. And, 35 points is the mercy rule. So Freeport could have easily packed it in, let the game be, let them go to a mercy rule, just run out the clock. But Freeport hung tough and scored some second half touchdowns and closed into the lead a little bit, but it just couldn't make it all the way back against Elizabeth Forward's pretty tough defense. Elizabeth Forward had 2 different players that ran for 2 touchdowns and was able to control it on the ground enough to hang on for the victory. But Freeport came back tough in the second half. I mean, they outscored Elizabeth Forward 20-7 in the second half. So credit to them, but it sets up a really, really good semifinal there. The first semifinal is Central Valley against Keystone Oaks, which is a matchup of conference opponents. They've already played once this year, and Central Valley won 65-14. So I don't think this one's going to be very close. Yeah. Even if Logan Shrub played in that first game, and they still lost 65-14. So even if he can play this week for Keystone Oaks, I mean, they might be able to make it a little bit closer, but Central Valley is just that much better. they're the defending WPIAL champions, and they've been saying all year about how their goal is to win the state championship game, and everything they put out has basically been focused on, their one goal is winning the state title, and that's it. And I mean, they've mercy ruled everyone they've played so far. They're averaging over 50 points a game. They've just been that darn good. And really, Central Valley, from a storyline standpoint, is a great example in a school merger, because they were formed in 2010. So their schools, this is only the 11th year they're playing football, between the merger of Center and Monaca school districts in Beaver County. So, Monaca had won some state titles. Center, it had been an okay program in AA for a while, but they merged, formed a 3A team, won the WPIAL title in their first year of existence in 2010. They've won 2 more since then, and they've reached the WPIAL championship game 5 times in 10 years. So for a school that didn't exist, 10 years ago, or just formed 10 years ago, it's a great success story.
Yeah, sounds very similar to Berks Catholic. They have formed from 2 Catholic schools, and only at that time did they really kind of forge into some success. So,
and then the other semifinal, this one's going to be a really good game from a personal standpoint. As a North Catholic alum, I'm wearing a North Catholic shirt here. Both these teams are undefeated. They've, North Catholic ranks 2nd in offense, 2nd in defense. Elizabeth Forward's 3rd in offense, 3rd in defense. These 2 teams played in a conference together in the last cycle, 2018-2019, with North Catholic winning both games, but they were tough, close defensive struggles. Last year in 2019, North only won 12-7. So, close, low-scoring games. I would not be surprised to see this one be a low-scoring game as well.
Really?
Oh yeah. Even usually I'll say, whenever 2 high-scoring but tough defensive teams get together in the playoffs, it winds up being a relatively low-scoring game. I mean, I could still see it being played in the 20s, but I don't think this game's going to be played in the 30s.
So you don't expect a 45-44 game.
No, this is not going to be the USC Texas NCAA championship.
We're going to have to rewind the tape next week. Because I think, I can't disagree with maybe North Catholic coming on top, but I think it's going to be high scoring. But that's just me.
Yeah,
these teams better than I do, but I think it's going to be a high scoring game. But I think they're just going to let it fly, baby.
We'll see. Elizabeth Forward is a run-heavy team. North Catholic's been a bit more balanced this year, so we'll see. We'll see how it winds up. Really, games like this come down to who can win in the trenches. And Elizabeth Forward has defensive end / tight end in Chase Watton, who's going to Bowling Green. So he's quietly somewhat been one of the best players in 3A this year. But from a storyline standpoint, Elizabeth Forward hasn't made a semifinal since 1999. They've never made it to a WPIAL championship game. North Catholic has made it to the semifinals relatively recently in 2017 and 2018, but they're only 1-10 all time in semifinals. Their only trip to a WPIAL final was in 2013. So you've got a team that's only made the championship game once against a team that's never made a championship game. So either way, it'll be a somewhat historic result here, regardless of who wins. And looking at the state bracket, I mean, my picks preseason was Central Valley over North Catholic for the WPIAL championship. And I think Central Valley, I've said it all along that they're the best 3A team in the state. But, I mean, there's some good teams out your way, too. Wyomissing's pretty good. Middletown's had a lot of success over the years. They made, 3
consecutive years they lost in the state championship game
to the WPIAL team.
Yep.
Because once we moved to 6 classifications, actually the crazy thing was, I don't know if you realized this, but there were 4 different WPIAL teams that all came from the same conference that reached the state championship game. So it was Beaver Falls, Quaker Valley, Aliquippa, and then Central Valley all played in a conference together. Um, so they were all playing each other in the regular season, and then Aliquippa made the WPIAL championship game all 4 years, but they lost to Beaver Falls and they lost to Quaker Valley. Then they finally won it, and then they lost to Central Valley last year. So pretty much it was like whoever came out of that conference was going to the state final. Not forget about all the other teams in the WPIAL and 3A. It was that one conference produced 3 state champions and 1 state runner-up in 4 years, which was pretty crazy.
Yeah, on the top side of that bracket, Wyomissing, I'm pretty familiar with them. I did their game last week. They're very powerful team. They've got good size. They're not going to beat themselves. Very high percentage passing game coupled with a really tough running game. But Montoursville, they're very good. Newman Goretti, that's the one that, they've only played one game. So, boy, that's going to be, it's going to be really interesting to see. They're like under pressure right there too. So I like Wyo a lot. I think Montoursville, very good on this side of the bracket. And so we'll see how it all shakes out. But going to be great to follow along here. I think 3A is going to be very interesting this year.
Yeah, I think it will be. I will say I like Central Valley's chances on the whole left side.
Yeah, I do.
Assuming they come out of
agree
WPIAL.
with you. I would agree with you there. I think it's very much a lot more competitive on the right side of the schedule. Like I said, the one that we really don't know anything about is the one you probably have to worry the most about, and that's Newman Goretti because of the historically talented players that they've got.
Yeah. In 2A, Beaver Falls won the Matsuk Bowl, which was Ryan Matsuk was Western Beavers head coach this year, but he had coached Beaver Falls to that 2016 WPIAL and PIAA championship. So Beaver Falls got some revenge on their old coach, and it was mostly just because Josh Huff ran all over him. He ran for 210 yards and 5 touchdowns. One of those was a 97-yard touchdown. Kid's averaging almost 20 yards a carry this year. He's going to Syracuse next year. He's just so good. And the surprise here, I think, for me was Apollo Ridge just taking it to Washington. I thought Apollo Ridge was good. They'd missed a few games because of COVID cancellations and some other cancellations. I didn't know how good Apollo Ridge was. I didn't know they were this good. And that was a surprising result just because I thought Apollo Ridge could win, but I thought it would be a lot closer. I'd actually picked Washington to make the WPIAL final preseason. I picked them in Beaver Falls, so that obviously couldn't happen because they were on the same half of the bracket. But Washington fumbled on the first 3 drives. Apollo Ridge got out to a 21-0 lead, and Logan Harmon ran for about almost 250 yards and 4 touchdowns, which was pretty much all it took. Once you jump out to a 21-0 lead against a team that really only runs the ball, it takes them a while to come back in the game, and Washington just didn't have it. So props to Apollo Ridge. Great performance. This was only the 4th playoff victory in Apollo Ridge school history. So great to see them in the semifinals now, taking on Beaver Falls, who moved down from 3A to 2A this year because of shrinking enrollment. And Beaver Falls is still the favorite, but after the way Apollo Ridge took it to Washington, I wouldn't count them out either. We'll talk a little bit more about their game in a minute, but the 2 games on the bottom half of this bracket, we had talked about how
City there, Sarah Catholic.
Somewhat, yes. We talked about how I thought any of these 4 teams were capable of making it to the WPIAL championship game. Sarah Catholic was undefeated coming into the playoffs. They didn't play Apollo Ridge because Sarah had a COVID outbreak. Actually, there were some questions about whether or not Sarah would even be able to play in the playoffs because of when their COVID cases happened and when they were able to resume practice. But they were able to get back in the playoffs and they were able to play. And McGuffey runs the ball a lot. They've got a triple option attack, and it's tough to slow them down. It's tough to figure out who has the ball. The teams went back and forth. McGuffey scored first. I think they had an 8-7 lead, and then it was 14-7, and then Sarah scored again. Terrell Booth had 2 receiving touchdowns. The second of his was with about 6 minutes left in the game. And then Sarah got the ball in the last minute of the game and hit like a 60-yard touchdown pass to Javon Holt, who just ran right through the middle of McGuffey's defense, which kind of made me wonder what kind of defense McGuffey was playing in a 14-14 game where they weren't playing prevent. But Holt just ran right through the middle of them. Beautiful pass from Max Rocco, who wound up with 3 touchdown passes on the day.
I got friends in the Rocco family, so I'm obviously
nice.
We're fans first, so obviously I got a rooting interest here in the 2A.
Yes. So Sarah had, like I said, they were undefeated entering the playoffs, but they didn't play Apollo Ridge, so didn't really know, we really didn't know a whole lot about them because they only played, a handful of games this year because of the missed games because of the COVID cases. And we knew what McGuffey had, and we had talked last week about how just kind of depending on how the game went, if McGuffey could control it with the running game, if Sarah's passing game could keep him in it, and it wound up being a low-scoring game, and Sarah got the winning play when it mattered. And then the other game, Laurel against Stowe Rocks, these 2 teams both had moved up from 1A to 2A this year. Laurel had actually beaten Stowe Rocks each of the last 2 years in regular season play. They had played in the same conference in 1A. They were in different conferences this year in 2A. Got matched up. Laurel jumped out to an early 14-0 lead, and then Stowe Rocks just battled back throughout the rest of the game. Laurel is a run-heavy team, really doesn't throw the ball at all, whereas Stowe Rocks throws the ball all the time. And in their previous meetings, the way Laurel had won was to control the line of scrimmage and put a lot of pressure on Stowe Rocks' quarterback and keep the ball away from him with their running game, but also just to not let Stowe Rocks' quarterback have any time to throw the ball. But Stowe Rocks was able to come back. Austin Jones, their quarterback, threw for a touchdown and then ran in the game winner. I think it was about 4 minutes to go in the game. Stowe Rocks opted to kick the extra point instead of go for 2, and they made it and won 21-20. So 2 really good games on the bottom half of that bracket, which is going to set up some really, really good semifinals here. Apollo Ridge now has the highest scoring team and statistically best defense in 2A. Those are a little bit different from the numbers we talked about last week, but these points per game numbers incorporate the first round playoff games as well. Beaver Falls has given up some points, but like we saw with Western Beaver, when you're scoring that much to have running backs who are that good, I mean, not just Josh Huff, but Shalik Livingston's been absolutely fantastic this year for him as well. These 2 teams actually met in back-to-back years in 2014 and in 2015 in the AA playoffs and played two great games against each other. Apollo Ridge won in 2014. Beaver Falls got revenge and won in 2015. So it's the third playoff meeting in, was it 7 years now? So this is Apollo Ridge's first semifinal appearance. They've never made a WPIAL final. Like I said, this was only their 4th playoff win in school history, whereas Beaver Falls has quite a bit more playoff tradition, at least, and playoff success, that they've made it to the WPIAL final 6 times, most recently in 2016 when they won that state title. And then the other matchup, which we just talked about, these teams, with Stowe Rocks and Sarah Catholic. 2 teams. Oh, those record numbers are wrong. That should be 5-0 and 4-0 for Sarah Catholic. My bad on that one. Sarah Catholic is still undefeated. Didn't edit the slide when I copied it over. But at any rate, 2 very high-scoring teams, and first playoff meeting between the 2 of them. Both of them have won WPIAL titles in the past. Stowe Rocks has – so this is the really interesting thing for me here. Neither of these teams has ever lost in a semifinal. Stowe Rocks is 6-0 in WPIAL semifinals, and Sarah Catholic is 2-0. Obviously, Sarah won theirs in 1981 and in 2007. Something's got to give here. Yeah, Stowe Rocks made 3 straight WPIAL finals from 2011, 2012, 2013, and lost all 3 of them. And they made the final again last year in 1A and lost to Clairton. So this will be an interesting one because both of them can throw the ball. I think Sarah's running game's a little bit better than Stowe Rocks's. But this, if you want a high scoring game, this one will be a high scoring game. This one they're gonna throw the ball over the yard, and both teams have athletes all over the place. So this will be a good one. In the state bracket, some big names here, obviously, Southern Columbia on the right-hand side, but Wilmington's been really good out of District 10. I think they just beat Farrell, who moved up from 1A to 2A this year, who was a dominant 1A program out of District 10. And then Berlin Brothers Valley's had some historical success as well out of District 5. So I think those are two teams to kind of keep an eye on there. I think Beaver Falls is the best team in the WPIAL, but the way Apollo Ridge beat Washington last week has me kind of second guessing that as well. And then with Sarah Catholic being 5-0 and having kind of that limited number of games, I still don't really know what all they have. And I mean, they might be good enough to win, to make a run too. So I think any of these teams could come out of the WPIAL right now. The WPIAL is really wide open. And then whatever team gets to a state semifinal might have to play Wilmington, who's been a really strong program in District 10 for a long time. So this is going to be just, for the right to probably face Southern Columbia. But it's going to be a really good left-hand side of the bracket and very competitive.
Yeah, right now, like you said, I'd be shocked if York Catholic doesn't play Southern Columbia on the right side of the bracket there. And, we all kind of know how that's going to play out. So, but anyway, York Catholic, great season. The funny thing is, never discount Bishop McDevitt. They have some good athletes. That's Bishop McDevitt from District 1 and, District 12. Right. And, never discount those guys, but they're none of the teams on that side of the brackets getting past Southern Columbia.
Yeah, you kind of feel for Richland, who they've had 2 or 3 straight. Well, they lost the game this year, I guess, but they 2 straight undefeated seasons, won the District 6 championship, and then just ran into Southern Columbia and got walloped by them. That kind of is what it is, I guess.
What it is.
Yep. Yeah, actually, I mean, Southern. If you want to talk about we talked about the state success formula with Aliquippa, and I mean, my personal opinion on it is, I think it's a good idea, but I think it should just be based on on-field success. It should take the transfer factor out of it, because if you had just based on on-field success, Southern Columbia would have had to move up a classification.
They should be playing in 4A.
At least, yeah, absolutely. But they apparently didn't have the transfers needed to qualify. So PIA needs to get rid of that transfer part and just do the success on the field part of the formula and move Southern Columbia up at least to 4A. Yeah. Moving down to 1A, you want to talk about the performance of the night was Dante Sanders for Clairton, running for 428 yards. That's not a typo. That's 428 yards and 6 touchdowns that he ran for. And that's pretty much the story there. It was that Olsh just couldn't stop him. This was the 3rd straight year that Clairton and Olsh had met in the playoffs, and each of the last 2 years, the winner of that game had won the WPIAL title. So we'll see if that holds this year. Olsh actually had beaten Clairton 2 years ago in the semifinals, and Clairton got revenge on Olsh last year in the first round of the playoffs, and then beat him again this year in the first round of the playoffs. The best game in 1A was between Shenango and California. Shenango's star running back, Reese Watkins, was out due to an injury. He'd missed the final game of the season against Rochester, which was for the Big 7 conference title, which was why Rochester got the number 2 seed and Shenango got dropped down to the number 5 seed. California playing in the Tri-County South, or I'll say much maligned Tri-County South, because a bunch of small rural school districts that has traditionally not performed very well in the playoffs, but they're always fun to watch and fun to follow. California and Novella made it out of there this year. Both of them lost in the first round, but California had a running back in Jaden Zuzak who was leading the WPIAL in rushing after 6 weeks, but they didn't play a week 7 game, so he got surpassed. The weird thing in this game was California threw 3 interceptions, which all year, all they had done was just hand it off to Jaden Zuzak, and then they get to the playoffs and start trying to throw the ball. And so Shenango.
Hey, look, sometimes you have to go away from the trend, but
No, they shouldn't have. I mean, Shenango's first touchdown was on a pick six, and then Shenango was up 21-7 in the fourth quarter, and then California was like, "Oh, maybe we should like hand off to our running back that almost led the WPIAL in rushing," and he scored a 44-yard touchdown, and then they got an onside kick, and he scored a 41-yard touchdown. So in the span of like 2 minutes of game time, I mean, California was down 21-7 with like 4 minutes left in this game, 4 or 5 minutes left. And then all of a sudden there's 2 minutes left and it's a tie game. So it's like, why weren't you guys giving this guy the ball the whole game, you know? I mean, Zuzak wound up with 191 yards and all 3 of California's touchdowns. But CJ Miller, who stepped in at running back for the aforementioned and injured Reese Watkins, wound up scoring the game-winning touchdown for Shenango with 54 seconds left to send them to the semifinals against Clairton. So, yeah, California, I think, with a bit of a strategic misplay there earlier in the game, trying to throw the ball. They should have handed it off more, but it was a thrilling game in the end. Very exciting with the comeback California mounted in the last few minutes. Rochester ran all over Springdale. They jumped out to a 28-17 halftime lead, but it was more of a blowout than even that seems. Springdale kind of scored a few times right before halftime to make it seem closer. Rashawn Reed ran for 204 yards and 3 touchdowns for Rochester, setting up a game against Jeanette, which we'll talk about in a minute. But Jeanette, with their true freshman quarterback and Brad Birch throwing for 4 touchdowns, running for another, just storming past Avella. Avella, you know, like we talked about, they had a 37-year playoff drought. Yeah. They've made the playoffs now 4 out of the last 8 years. Great story that they're actually here, but Jeanette's just a force unto themselves. We talked last week about how we didn't expect that one to be very close, and right. I think that was the biggest blowout of the week. Jeanette certainly was the highest scoring team of the week with 62 points. So looking ahead to the semifinals, we've got Clairton against Shenango. Clairton's beaten Shenango twice in the past. This is Clairton's 15th straight semifinal appearance. They are the defending WPIAL 1A champions. They have the second most WPIAL championships behind Aliquippa. So Clairton is the historic storied program here, and Shenango moved down from 2A to 1A this year and benefited from the slightly lower level of competition. I mean, I say slightly because Shenango played in some close games too. Obviously, they lost to Rochester. It wasn't like they just ran over everyone, but this game, I think, kind of depends on if Reese Watkins is able to come back. Because not only is he a really good running back, but he's an excellent linebacker. And if you're going to slow down Dante Sanders, who just ran for 400 plus yards, then you're going to need an excellent linebacker like that.
How much of these schools, you talk about like Aliquippa, you talk about Clairton, I mean, how much is that reputation, I shouldn't say precede them, but I mean, just kind of predetermine the outcome before the game is even played?
I'll say somewhat. Playing Aliquippa is kind of like playing Duke in basketball. It's there was a saying that 70% of the games that Duke wins in Cameron were lost when the opposing team walked onto the floor and heard the crowd and just kind of got scared. But it's kind of like that with Aliquippa too, and they have a tradition before the game where a guy dressed in full Native American regalia rides a horse out onto the field with a flaming spear and spikes the spear at midfield on the 50-yard line. And there was my favorite story this year was in the Trib from I think it was a player from Chartiers Valley. He said, I heard stories about the horse and I didn't know if they were real. And I went on YouTube and looked, and that horse is real. It's like, yeah, there's actually a guy that rides a horse out onto the field and throws a flaming spear down. And so there is somewhat of that aura with especially Aliquippa where they're tough to play, and Clairton too. I mean, while Aliquippa is a 1A size school that's able to play up, they have a much bigger roster size than Clairton does. Clairton's one of the smallest schools in the WPIAL, but they've just been able to build a program there that from youth sports all the way up through high school just churns out fantastic athletes that are able to just be great all around athletes. I mean, they've been good basketball players. They've been good football players. The Tyler Boyd team. I mean, that Tyler Boyd, they called themselves the Killer T's with Tyler Boyd, Terrence Webb, and Titus Howard. Not only did they win like the football titles, but they won like track championships as well. And whenever you have guys winning, the 4x100 meter relays, the state track titles, then going out and playing football, like that makes a huge difference athletically with some of the other players that you're playing against, just from a speed standpoint.
Mm-hmm.
And Shenango's a school from up in Lawrence County, up by Newcastle. So it's Clairton, I'll say, has some history with those schools, more with Laurel than with Shenango. That Laurel was the only team that beat that Tyler Boyd Clairton team in their 4 years. So this will be a good game. Shenango's a tough defensive team, but I think Clairton's just that much better. That you're certainly right. There is an aura about them, and especially an aura of playing in Neil Brown Stadium in front of their home crowds that bring them the milk jugs full of coins and the cowbells and all that stuff that they're shaking and making noise. And even with fewer fans in the stadiums, it can still be an intimidating place to play. And the one other thing I should mention that I probably should have mentioned at the beginning of the show was that in the past years, the WPIAL has used neutral sites for semifinals, but this year, because of COVID, they said that all the semifinal games are going to be at the home field of the higher seeded team. So,
and the funny thing is, I find once districts and or leagues go that route, they never go back. They will never go back to the neutral site. I'd be shocked if the WPIAL does that, because every other league and every other district that I've seen do that is that there's so much benefit from an excitement and revenue perspective. Okay, let's talk about that revenue perspective, that they rarely go back. So it's going to be interesting to see how that transforms year after year here.
Yeah, I think the one thing that could play a factor, and actually did play a factor this past week for Clairton, is that both of these 1A schools that will be hosting games, so Clairton and Rochester, both play on grass fields. And we had a lot of rain this past week here in Western Pennsylvania. And so Clairton's game actually had to get moved to Norwin, that has a turf field. And that's one of the things that the WPIAL's always done, is when they've had neutral site games, they've always put them at turf fields. They haven't hosted them on grass fields. Which I guess provides somewhat more of an even playing surface. Although, both teams have to play in the same field regardless of the surface. But
it took 10 years for District 3 to allow Wyomissing to schedule a home playoff game on their field, and it's a kind of a double negative, because it not only is a grass field, but there's no lights, so they have to play on Saturday afternoon. So, but still, I mean, let them play. I mean, there was a couple of years ago when we had like a monsoon across the state, and all you did was see those playoff games that were played, in the mud. Let them play. I mean, it's the end of the year.
Yep. Well, and what's funny to me is, for a while, like, Heinz Field has always been known as having like the worst turf in the entire NFL, and the WPIAL plays their championship games there. So like, they're so concerned about playing their quarterfinal, semifinal games on neutral sites where it's like, oh, we got to get them on a turf field.
If they were worried about field conditions, then they wouldn't play 6 games in a day or whatever.
And then you play your championship game at Heinz Field, where it's the worst playing surface they play on all year. So,
right, exactly.
Yep. The other semifinal, this is going to be a good one between Rochester and Jeannette. So they've met in the playoffs 3 times. Now, this will be the 4th meeting in the last 5 years. Jeannette won in 2016 and 2017. Rochester won in 2018. And that 2018 semifinal between Rochester and Jeannette. So Jeannette had won the 2017 WPIAL title, 2017 state title, went undefeated in the 2018 regular season, beat Clairton in the season finale, which hasn't happened that often for Jeannette. I think we've talked about how Jeannette's now 72-3 since 2014 against WPIAL teams not named Clairton, and just 2-8 against Clairton. So they got that one win against Clairton in the regular season. They're the number 1 seed in the playoffs, and then Rochester beats. And actually, Jeannette earlier that year had beaten pretty handily beaten Olsh, who wound up winning the WPIAL title that year and was the top seed in the other half of the bracket. So like Jeanette was rolling, like, you know, got this game against Rochester in the semifinals, and then Rochester came out and just ran all over them and shut down their offense, and Olsh wound up winning the WPIAL title. So Jeanette's probably going to be out for some revenge for that game. Obviously, you know, it's a couple years ago, so some different players because you have graduations and such. But nevertheless, this is going to be a good game. Rochester's got statistically the best defense in 1A. Jeanette has the second-ranked offense and defense. Jeanette's got that freshman quarterback in Brad Birch who can throw the ball over the yard. Rochester's got 3 really good running backs in Denny Robinson and Rashawn Reed and Sal Laurie. So this is going to be a really good matchup.
Was the 2017 championship in 1A?
Yes.
Okay.
Yeah.
I couldn't remember. I mean, I remember I was very impressed with the team and everything like that. I did the game there in Hershey. I couldn't remember whether it was a 2A or 1A championship.
It was 1A. Jeanette moved down from AA to single A in 2014, so 2 years before we went to 6 classifications. Yep. But yeah, this is going to be a good one. I like Jeanette's chances. My preseason pick here was Clareton over Jeanette for the WPIAL title, so I'll stick with that one. But I would not be shocked if Jeanette pulled what would be an upset over Clareton either, because Jeanette, their only loss this year was to Clareton, and they've gotten a lot better since then, because that was a week 1 game, first week of the year, freshman quarterback, you know how it goes. But
Right.
Brad Birch has gotten a lot better since then too as a quarterback. So Jeanette's rolling right now, and I really like their chances. Rochester's 1 loss was to Fort Cherry, and we interviewed Fort Cherry's head coach after that game too. So that's, you know, and he talked a lot about how good Rochester is and how historically good they've been. I mean, look at the pedigree here. Both these teams have made 13 WPIAL championship games. Rochester's 13-8 in the semifinals, and Jeanette's 13-9.
Look, you win 3 state titles in 4 years. I mean, you're doing something at any point in time in a school history. You're really going to develop some following and some some tradition.
Yep. Yeah. So these are 2 really good historical programs. This will be their 4th meeting in 5 years in the playoffs. I'm excited to watch this one. This is going to be a good one.
I do too. I agree.
Looking at the statewide bracket here in 1A, I think Reynolds is having, I believe, a historically good season in District 10. But I think either Clareton or Jeanette's the best team out of the left side of the bracket. I think whoever wins out of the WPIAL is going to the state final. But on the right side, I mean, Old Forge has had some historically good seasons. They lost to North Catholic in the 2013 WPIAL final. I remember that game. It's my alma mater. And Steel High's had some really good historic seasons as well.
They've got a very talented team there right now. Steel High. Bishop Guilfoyle, very interesting.
Yeah, never count them out either. They've played some really good games.
One of those losses was a forfeit for, I think, an eligible player, so they really only legitimately have 1 loss. And Homer Center, I mean, you know, they've historically good team there too. So
didn't they made a state championship game a few years ago?
They did. That's absolutely right. So I mean, you know, these are all historically good programs. You know, Steel High, I mean, very talented group. I think they've got their hands full with Muncie this week. So yeah, I don't think that quite honestly, there's any clear favorite other than, you know, the WPIAL champ in the whole 1A bracket. I think that there are a lot of teams that could emerge. And that's the fun thing, I think, about, you know, 1A and 2A. Well, 1A anyway, is that it's other than the WPIAL champ, probably it's pretty clear that whoever comes out of that, you know, Clareton Jeanette matchup is favored to get to Hershey. I think everybody on the right side there, I think it's all talented teams, all wide open.
Yeah. Well, I mean, I'll say 1A, at least on the left side here, probably lost a little luster with Farrell having to move up to 2A this year. Farrell's reached, was it 3 straight state championship games, I believe, out of District 10, and the state success formula forced them up to 2A this year. So District 10's 1A programs, maybe not as, recently historically successful just because of how good Farrell had been. And they'd kind of stood in the way of the WPIAL teams reaching the state title game as well a few times. But looking at the right side of the bracket, like you talked about, I mean, we could have a state quarterfinal of, Old Forge against Steel High and then Bishop Guilfoyle against Homer Center. I mean, those are 4 really good, historically good programs, potentially all meeting in a state quarterfinal. I mean, that would be, that'd
be a lot of fun.
A lot of fun. Yeah. So that's all I've got. We ran through all 6 classifications. We'll see what happens. We're in the round of 60 in the state tournament. We're in the semifinals of most of the WPIAL brackets. So it should be a good week.
Yeah. Why don't you end the share there so that we're back here. But yeah, this is going to be cool. We're going to be transitioning from, obviously WPIAL, and into more, how that's translating into the state brackets, especially now it's kind of pared down because there's no District 11 in there, and a lot of other teams that are out of it, but it's still going to be very interesting, and I'm really looking forward to it. I mean, for me, I'll be, covering all the championship games for Eastern PA football, and I'm still kind of riding the coattails of Governor Mifflin, broadcasting their games here for the next, for as long as they go here. So we'll see how that.
Well, maybe you'll get to see, PINE-RICHLAND or Gateway or Peters Township, one of those teams, play them in the state.
Yeah, I know. See, that's what I keep telling all my friends here. I'm going like, man, you guys need to start looking at the show here, because ultimately, my friends at WIO, my friends here at Governor Mifflin, really all of my District 3 guys are saying, man, you need to watch the show just so that you get an idea of what these teams are all about before you get there. I mean, what are they doing on a, Monday or Tuesday anyway? I mean, when they get home at 9 o'clock, come on, take a half hour and, get away from the projector or whatever like that and watch the show. But it's been a lot of fun, man. I mean, it gets, more exciting now. We get down to really championship week, for, next week in the WPIAL, right?
Yep. Yeah. So the 6A championship is this week, and then all the other ones will be next week. So it's a favorite time of the year, figure out who the WPIAL champions are. And for some schools, I mean, just making it this far, like with Apollo Ridge has been historic, with Elizabeth Forward. If they go farther, Elizabeth Forward's looking to make their first championship game in school history. Apollo Ridge has never made a championship game. So, some of these schools are borderline on the verge of having historic success or have already had historic success versus, some schools that have been there, done that for a long time. And we'll see if they're able to do it again with a new crop of players too.
Yeah, unfortunately, there are so many good stories, but then, this is the tough time of the year too, because, you have so many friends really around, and you're really rooting for certain stories, but ultimately it seems like this time of year, it's more the cream that rises to the top rather than, the good stories carrying on. But hey, that's why we play the games, right?
Absolutely. Yep. I mean, we can talk all about where kids are going to school next year, but scholarship offers don't always win games on Friday nights. You got to play the games.
Yeah, it's that football is the epitome of a team game. So, all right, my man. Well, listen, we'll be back again next week, and it can't get it. I guess it's going to continue to get more exciting as we head down to Hershey. So, all right, for my man Ian, I'm Badge. Hey, listen. Thanks for watching this week on the WPIAL Blitz Show. We'll be back next week with more championship action. See you later, guys.